Cool. Hopefully it's entertaining. Maybe you learned something. I don't know. So my name is Sean. I have a whole slide talking about myself because I'm a narcissist. So I'm going to be talking about styling and modularization in Vue.js. Subtitle, I want web components now. Some of us were talking beforehand. One of the main reasons why I like Vue.js is that it is the closest thing to web components that we can get right now that works across every browser. I'm still personally holding out for web components. I want that to be a thing, and I just want to write JavaScript. I don't want to have to write, learn a new library. Again, I was discussing with some of you guys. I'm currently working on a project for Hearst Autos that's in Vue. I work full-time at a company, and the project that I'm on right now with them is in React. And then for my own, some of my freelance work on the side, I'm writing it in Ionic. So I'm actually bouncing between 3 different frameworks right now. So that's why I'm pulling hard for web components to just kind of eventually come out, because just writing JavaScript would be great. I'd read fewer docs. I hate slide presentations, although I do them because I understand the importance. They come from this layer of hell, from Milton's Paradise Lost. So if nothing else, you'll get out of this a little art lesson. This is a great picture by an artist, Gustav Dorr. And if you're a heavy metal fan, various versions of this have shown up on different heavy metal albums, usually with awful overlays to make it more evil, which is just silly. I kind of feel like PowerPoint came from the depths of hell, but it's usable. What I won't do is read a bunch of stuff to you from slides. I'm going to tell you things, and we will have slides and we will have images. Those are mostly there to help me remember what to tell you, because it's not story time with Sean. I'm not going to just flip through a book and read you the pages. That's not what we want to do. So who am I? I'm a UGA grad. I'm proud to be Athens made. I actually just moved to the Atlanta area from Athens. I lived in Athens for about 20 years. Went to the University of Georgia and just stayed. Was working in, started off about 10, I think I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary of being a full-time developer. Started off working in a marketing agency that was based out of greater Atlanta, but we had virtual offices, so I was able to work from home. Then worked with a bunch of startups and a startup incubator in Athens called For Athens. If you're ever up there, ask for Athens. They're a fantastic company. If you're interested, there's actually a really nice little burgeoning startup scene happening there. It's very small. We have one developer meetup that has developers of all stripes. We don't have enough different developers to have different meetups for different technologies, let alone for different JavaScript frameworks. So we just have the one big meetup. Right now, I work for a company called CoDesign. We make JavaScript applications that sit on top of SharePoint. This has been there for about a month, and it's been really interesting to play around. Like I said, we're building a React application that is pulling some analytics data that we are just pinging SharePoint's REST interface for. Microsoft has done some weird stuff, particularly for any of us who have been in this game for a while and knew Microsoft back in the evil old days. I used to be a systems administrator and remember the days of Microsoft and Active Directory gradually eating the lunch of things like NetWare, which is what I was supporting at the time. Dark times. And Microsoft was the evil enemy. And now they make all these weird and interesting open source tools. And SharePoint has gone from this super closed source thing to this open source thing that you can actually, what I'm doing, one of the things I'm doing at CoDesign, and one of the reasons why they offered me the job is because I've got experience with some modern build tools. And so they're moving away from the Microsoft GUI tools that were current 5 years ago, and they want to get involved in things like NPM and Webpack and Node and all that. And SharePoint has opened that up as of a couple years ago. So it's been really interesting there. I'm also a UX development consultant for Hearst Autos. That's carandriver.com. Some of the demos that I show you will be the work that I was doing and I'm still working on over at Hearst Autos. I was working full-time with them for about 6 months, helped them get some pattern libraries up, mostly focusing on UX. So I didn't do a lot of the middle layer logic. So when it comes to things like, should we use Vuex or MobX, or how do you want to do state management in Vue? Those aren't questions that I can answer. But when you talk about structuring your single file components and making reusable chunks of web code, that's the kind of stuff that I was working on there. And that's what I'm working on with them right now, is creating a full-blown pattern library, but doing it in the Vue ecosystem so they can apply that across some internal applications as well as the actual carandriver.com site when it gets to that point. I also teach JavaScript at the Creative Circus. Creative Circus is a design school, so it's a lot of students that will go into sort of marketing world and ad agency. So I teach a lot of vanilla JavaScript. They need to know basic DOM manipulation, how to make regular AJAX queries. The nice thing is that we can do all that in JavaScript now, and it's way easier than it used to be. If you were around for the early days of jQuery when it made JavaScript not suck, well, now JavaScript doesn't suck, and it's a lot of fun. And then again, I also do freelance consulting with my own company, Torch Code Lab. Torch Code Lab is named after my super rad cat that I had many moons ago named Torch. He was this giant thing that looked like he was always about to burst into flames. There's actually a breed of Siamese called Flame Point Siamese. I didn't even know that was a thing. But he looked like the Human Torch from Fantastic Four. And so he was rad, so I just named my company after him. What I am not is a Vue.js expert. I've been working with it for a few months, so I don't have all the answers. But I will answer what I can. And we have Wi-Fi, so we can look other stuff up. So this is my professional photo, actually taken down at Disney World at Epcot. I go there all the time because I'm a snob and I love Disney. So that's my professional photo because it makes it look like I know what the hell I'm talking about. But this is probably more me on a regular average day. This is actually from Dragon Con where I'm wearing a ridiculous red suit to match my obnoxious red shoes, and I answer to the name Rad Ranger. I'm a huge Power Rangers fan. I'm a lifelong metalhead. I have questionable social skills. I have even worse PowerPoint skills, and I love obnoxious footwear, much to the chagrin of my friends, and thankfully not my girlfriend who encourages that, and that could be dangerous. So enough about me. Let's talk about where all this stuff started. So 5-6 years ago, I attended a conference down in Orlando, and Brad Frost was talking about atomic design. Brad Frost is a designer based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And he was just beginning to put together the book, Atomic Design. Go to atomicdesign.bradfrost.com. You can actually buy the finished product. It's definitely worth it if you're a designer particularly, or if you do anything inside of UX. Spent a lot of time writing HTML and CSS. Can't recommend this book enough. Along with that, Brad was developing a tool called Pattern Lab. Pattern Lab allowed for breaking down web development away from this idea of you give me, how many designers do we have here? You remember the days of the, one, you're on the spot and I'm gonna need you to speak for all designers everywhere. Do you remember the days of creating a giant monolithic PSD that you would then like toss over the wall to a developer? Right, awful. Developers hated them too, a lot. Sketch is glorious. So we used to think of the web in terms of pages, right? And everything was this monolithic top-down, this is what the page looks like. That's not how applications are built, right? Like when Microsoft sat down to write Microsoft Office, when Google sat down to make Gmail, they didn't go, well, how should this web page look? They're like, it's an application, right? We got buttons, we got links, we got things we need to do, we've got interactions. How do we want to build those interactions? Well, you do that by breaking things down to their smallest parts. And so what Brad did with Atomic Design, not to be confused with Atomic CSS, which if you were here earlier, you heard me rant about, I hate it with the fury of 1,000 suns. Atomic Design is using sort of chemical notation, right? So it's atoms combined into molecules, combined into organisms, which create templates and then ultimately generate what your page should look like or what the page part of your application should look like. So that was a game changer because again, at the time I was working for a marketing agency. We were doing a lot of landing pages. We were doing a lot of, the easiest way to say it is that I was working for a company whose every client was Lex Luthor. And we were doing websites for them in content management systems. It was a very interesting experience. I got to sit in the cheap seats to see how to not do a lot of things. Definitely valuable. So, and this was when, again, this was in the early days. So mobile had just come around. The iPhone had just launched. We had just started to see the end of Flash. Responsive design was new and it was coming about. And so as a developer and working with designers, there was a lot of push and pull. There was a lot of struggle. And it was, you know, stop giving me these static comps that are all 960 pixels wide because suddenly I got this thing and that doesn't work anymore. So how do we work with that? So this was a game changer from a strictly HTML and CSS standpoint. This was a different way to write code. Pattern Lab was a tool that you could go in and you could focus on just an atom. You could focus things on the atomic level. So if I just needed to figure out how the topography of every paragraph should look, I just wrote a paragraph tag. I wrote it in handlebars. the JavaScript language. And so I could just pass some dummy values into it and some mocks, and I could pass a real JSON file into it. And really, to its credit, as Pattern Lab has evolved, it's kind of become more of a static site generator in a way. Kind of is a weird design tool, but also you could use it instead of Jekyll. And so you could really break stuff down. Okay, how does this header interact? Right, now I know how my paragraphs look. How do my paragraphs look when I combine them with headers? How do these things look when I put them in larger divs? How does this behave on a hero? What does this button look like? And how do I make sure this button looks the same everywhere? Still had the same problems that we have today with CSS that we're struggling with, things like global namespacing. BEM wasn't around yet, so I was like, okay, well, what kind of weird naming convention do we come up with so that things don't bleed together, so that this style that I put on line 200 of this style sheet doesn't change something that I put up on line 5 because I managed to screw up that cascade, right? SAS obviously came along, made this a lot easier and that kind of thing. So, but this began my obsession with breaking things down into their tiniest possible parts and then making, seeing how they would go together in kind of a logical fashion and building web pages by stacking Lego bricks on top of each other, building applications by taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that and literally creating like a recipe. And how do I create all the ingredients that I need for all this stuff? So that's where that stuff started with me. Then I began to read about web components. Adi Osmani's Polymer framework had come out, and I was like, my mind was, I was like, yes, do this. This is what I want. I want to be able to do this with JavaScript, just like I want to do this with HTML and CSS, and this is how I want to build all these things together. I had the idea. I was like, right, I had my patterns, so I could put the stuff together and create just a static page. But what if I wanted to make it more dynamic? At this point, I was gradually moving out of writing a lot of PHP backend code and moving more into writing a lot of front-end code. jQuery, like I said, had made JavaScript suck less, so I was able to do some of this stuff. And I was like, oh, this is a game changer. And I put all my eggs in that basket. And they're still there because we're not there yet. We're getting there. So what's the holy grail, right? So web components would be the whole, y'all know what this is, right? I'm not using, please, I worry when I give some of these talks that my age is starting to show. And I put up images and people go, I have no idea what the hell that is. If you don't know what this is, it's Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and you should leave right now and go home and watch it because it's freaking amazing. I wish I had coconuts right now, actually. So web components are kind of the Holy Grail. We're not really there yet. We're still searching for it. So how do we get there? Well, if these jerks could just kind of figure some of this stuff out, right, we'd have it. If these guys could all get along, but no. Particularly this asshole right here, who on phones doesn't support a damn thing, which I mean is great if you're in, like I say that, right? I'm making fun of Opera because it's easy to make fun of Opera. But at the same time, like if you are not in a major city in a major first world country with amazing Wi-Fi speeds, right, and LTE, then Opera is your best friend because it's stripping out all the garbage that people keep putting on. It makes Angular apps not render, and that's fine. You don't need to use those. I'm kidding. I've had a lot of bad experience with Angular. But yeah, so I'm making fun of Opera, but at the same time, it's pushing developers to say, okay, well, maybe we don't need to use all these bells and whistles because, oh, by the way, there are people in developing countries that might want to use an application, Facebook, so you want to get those people online, so make this work this. But you know, as developers, we all feel this pain, right? We're all here. And then we get the bug tickets and like, oh, it works for me. Ah, nice. Co-design has been, so I haven't touched a Microsoft browser in a very long time because I haven't had to. Car and driver stats, like the usage stats of people using Internet Explorer are so low. And we're talking, this is a company that does 14 million uniques in organic search every month. And we get less than 1% using IE. And that's less than 1%. It might be 1% total, Edge plus IE 11. Like it's so small. And again, 80-20 rule, we're maximizing for most of the traffic. And we can hit 95% of the traffic just by targeting Chrome and Firefox and Safari. So working at co-design where we're working with a lot of enterprise people that are using Microsoft SharePoint and they still have IE 11 because that's what their applications were built on. They've got old ASP.NET applications, and some of them might still have VB.NET applications that require IE 11. And so it's been really interesting looking at that. Doubly interesting because even Microsoft says with SharePoint, like, just use Edge. Like, don't use IE 11 anymore. You're like, well, damn it. So yeah, so if these jerks get together, we could have web components, and it would be awesome. But then also we have this. And we have all of these. This is a photo from HappyCog. Y'all know HappyCog? Jeffrey Zeldman, the guy that kind of spearheaded the Web Standards project back in the day. HappyCog was the company that he started. He's since gone on to do other things. The Event Apart or a List Apart books. Do you guys know that? So yeah, yes, I got it. Good. Share with them because they're great books. You should know them. Jeffrey Zeldman was kind of behind those events as well, so HappyCog factors into that a little bit. This is their one of their early device labs. I'm sure it's even greater now. But yeah, so not only do we have to figure out like that question, but then we got to figure out that question. Like, oh hell! And then Samsung, well, they can't make up their damn mind on a size. So it's like for a while there, I felt like every 2 weeks, Samsung announced another device that was at another size. And I was having to figure out another damn breakpoint because I was like, oh, shit. Damn it, Samsung. And that's where tools like Pattern Lab came in really handy because I could just start creating breakpoints based on where the content broke, not on where the devices did. Because, again, this is really tricky. And these things will support, different things. You may have some people that are still on Android 4.0 and earlier versions, right? Not all of us are running Oreo. Not all of us are on iOS 8. There are still people. My dad will probably die still using his BlackBerry for as much as he can because he's just like, I like this. It makes sense. So yeah, so we have that and we have this. And so then we have these. And this is going to fix it all, right? I actually edited a few of these out. I found this online and edited a few of them out because I didn't even know what the hell they were. I was like, I'm just going to go with the stuff that I know. This one, if you haven't looked at it, Aurelia is actually pretty interesting. It's one of the guys that was on the Angular team. And when they went the Angular 2 direction, he went, that's screwed up. So I'm going to take all the stuff that was good about Angular 1.5, and I'm just going to develop this whole other thing. The company that I was last with in Athens, we were doing Backbone. Backbone's stable. It gets the job done. I've sort of strong-armed it into doing components. But we were looking at replacing it with Aurelia. So obviously, we don't really care about any of these except for this one right here, right? This is the VueJS Meetup. But this just goes to show, like, all of these solutions, right? All of these different, we have these to deal with these because of that, right? That's the tricky part. Because these guys can't get it together, so we don't have those. So all of that. So this is the VueJS Meetup, right? All we give a damn about is Vue. And this is where I fell in love with Vue when we were looking at it. So a little background. Man, if that picked up on the microphone, I apologize. This is going to sound gross. I'm getting over a cold, so I'm like, I need to have water. Does anybody listen to the Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast? Did I just show my white trash roots? This guy just name checked Stone Cold. He constantly is drinking beer, and he's like, a little beer for the working man. Nobody in this room understands what the hell I'm talking about now. We've gone completely off the rails. So carndriver.com currently, the current version is an Angular 2 single-page application for what effectively could be served up by a very high-powered CDN-based WordPress install. It's a little over-engineered. I can say this because I don't work there full-time anymore. Hell, I said this when I was there. They do have some applications that they're working on building that part of the reason why they went with a single-page application to effectively serve an online magazine is to open up the ability to increase or enhance some of these articles with the application they're building to help you find information on new and used cars, right? That's where they're looking at going. So that's why they were going down that route, and that's why they did this. What they found, And they hired some consultants that came in and they built this whole thing for them. And what they found is it's slow and it's clunky and it's overkill for what they need right now. Because what they need right now is something that can serve up magazine pages really quickly. They don't have the application yet. That's something that they're going to be adding on later. It's an enhancement that's coming down the road. And so they went with what they thought was going to lay a really solid foundation, and unfortunately, it's not the right tool for the job. So if you go to carandriver.com right now, don't. It's slow. You'll find great content on cars and beautiful photos. Good Lord. The photos, if you're even remotely a car person, just go to the Italian section. Look at the Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and you'll just disappear for hours. So that stuff is beautiful, but the application they built doesn't get the job done. So with all that in mind, this again is a site that does 14 million uniques. These are organic uniques. This is just Google throws traffic at them. If you go to SEMrush and put in car and driver, you will see they do next to no ad buys. You go look at some of their competitors like Kelley Blue Book, Car Gurus, that kind of stuff, similar in that space, even Motor Trend. There's a lot more ad buys there. So Car and Driver is kind of owning the SEO, and what they need are pages that can be crawled easily, indexed easily by Google, and pulled up quickly. We've all heard the 3-second abandonment rate, right? If your page doesn't load, if your application doesn't load, at least in some usable state, within 3 seconds, your abandonment rate is going to skyrocket, right? So what they needed to do is they realized the team that they had hired at this point, and this is right about the time that I came in, sat down and looked at it, and we were like, this Angular thing isn't going to work. And do we want to continue to invest time in coming up with making the Angular solution work and just sort of fighting with it? Or do we just want to punt and say, okay, well, that was a good version 1, version 2 is going to be something different? Decided to go with the latter. What we did is look at all of the frameworks that were out there. Vue is still new. It's huge in China. It's used on Alibaba, which if you're not familiar, Alibaba is kind of, they might even be bigger than Amazon in China. They're massive. So it's a thing that gets hammered, right? This is a framework that is getting battle tested just as much as React and these other frameworks are. And what we found that we really, really liked is that there's this one plugin called Nuxt that does static site generation, and it can do server-side rendering. So that means we can actually generate all of the pages that we need in a way that Google can index them so that we don't have to worry about our search rankings taking a hit. And if you want to watch grown folks panic, the SEO team, anytime we would have a drop in organic traffic, there's a dude that's in charge of that team, and he's taller than I am standing on this stage, right? He's like 6'5". He looks like Lurch from the Addams Family and has an accent very similar to it. And when search traffic would drop, dude would not be happy. And again, if you know who Lurch is, an unhappy Lurch is not something you want to see walking around an office. So we dug in and we said, okay, well, we're going to go all in on this Vue thing. And it's risky, but we think we can do it. We think we have a good enough team to do it. How many people were here for the last meeting that was actually at the Hearst Autos? David spoke of that one, right? David spearheaded doing this Vue thing. And I jumped in and again, I was their lead UX developer. So I was just thinking about, like, I don't have to write a lot of middle layer logic stuff, right? How do I make my part work? I was working directly with the designers. For most of my time there, I wrote very little code. I acted as a translator between the designers and the developers because they had a lot of JavaScript engineers and a lot of pure designers that could put together a little HTML and CSS if they had to, but it wasn't their first language, right? Their first language was Sketch and UI and user testing and that kind of stuff. So I kind of straddled the line between them, and we had started building a pattern library. We have a design system called Project Goldblum. Goldblum, 2 words, so that Jeff Goldblum, who we love and admire, doesn't sue us for trademark infringement. But it's totally named after Jeff Goldblum. And we use Jeff Goldblum pictures on all the stuff internally. We started working on this design system and saying, okay, we have some internal tools that we're building. We have the external site, the car and driver public-facing site that we're rebuilding. How do we make it so these things look the same? A actual literal problem that we had, and again, this is where part of my hatred for atomic CSS, not atomic design, but atomic CSS, tachyons, that kind of thing comes from. You would have the home page. The home page would look great, pristine, perfect. All the buttons are perfect. You would take that same button with classes like PT05, M10, B4, and other nonsense words that looked like Morse code, and you would copy that same exact HTML on an internal page, right? Something that's not on the home page, say like a car review page. Look fine right at the top. The button looks exactly how the button should look. Scroll down the page and that button is janky as hell. The text is all off, it's lying wrong. It's the same exact HTML, but something about the inheritance, like how do we control? So when we come up with a design, we say buttons look like this. Headers look like this, right? This is a magazine. Car and Driver is based on magazine. This is old media going new media. They have really strict design guidelines. Like they have legal teams that go like you've got to use this font and you can only use this font and this font applies in these ways and all kinds of other weird headaches that I had never experienced before. So you have to control for this stuff, and slapping together class names to try to get it to work it didn't work out. And so they said, well, hey, Sean, take a look at this Vue thing. They've got this thing called single file components. And I was like, all right, well, let's check this out. So this is from the Vue site directly, and this is a Vue component. And what you've got up here, in your template tags, that's your HTML. In your script tags, that's your JavaScript that relates to that page. Down at the bottom is your CSS. One nice thing you can do, you throw this scoped word on there inside your style. All of these styles are scoped to that and only that. You can put whatever styles you want here. It's going to apply to this thing and this thing only. Whatever this is that you're creating, it will look the same everywhere you put it because it has the same styles. The styles carry with it and they are scoped to it. You don't have the global scope problem that most people have with CSS when you're wrestling with inheritance. And you have to make sure that you got your name spacing just right and don't forget anything. This takes care of all of that. So some people, a lot of JavaScript engineers, what about separations of concern? So from the horse's mouth, I'll just let you read it. The TLDR is, for years, we have been separating CSS into a styles folder, JavaScript into a scripts folder, HTML into an HTML folder, because that's our separation of concerns. When we started doing it, we had the best of intentions, and it was really the best way to go. Ultimately, all we were doing, particularly when we started doing applications, again, web apps change everything. Gmail flipped the script on all of it. If it wasn't for those things, if we didn't start using the browser as a runtime environment and we were still just slapping together pages, all of those old things would still apply and we'd still be doing that same stuff. I'd still be building expression engine websites for Lex Luthor. But we don't. We build applications now. We use the browser as a runtime. So what we find is that we didn't necessarily have separation of concerns, just separations of technologies. So with a web component, what you're saying is this piece needs HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to run. So I'm just going to lump that together with this piece. None of the JavaScript and none of the HTML and none of the CSS will have anything to do. So if I've got a button, I don't have anything in there about paragraphs because it's a button and it's a button component. If I have a paragraph, I don't have things in there about buttons because it's a paragraph component. And so we just let each of these things focus on what they do. Vue makes this really simple. So advantages and disadvantages. This is the dumbest image in the world and I love it. I couldn't come up with anything really interesting for this slide, so I literally just went looking for the dumbest advantages, disadvantages thing I could find. I almost used one of those weird white, round-headed, non-people things that show up everywhere that's in like in every stock photo thing that's like right on the front of iStock photo, and I couldn't bring myself to use it, so we got the weird brain thing. Advantages of using Vue's single file component. Again, everything is contained. You create a button, that button, its behavior, its styles, looks the same, behaves the same everywhere you put it. Disadvantages, it's a new way of doing it, so it's a little bit harder, but in working with Ionic, React, Vue, Backbone, Angular, all of the different frameworks that I have literally touched in the last 12 months, Vue's learning curve has been the shortest. It is the easiest to get ramped up on. Creative Circus is actually changing their advanced JavaScript frameworks class from React to Vue, because you can just drop the Vue script into the bottom of the page like you could with jQuery and just start writing out some Vue. Makes it really simple. All right, that's impossible to read, but this is the part where I stop the dumb slideshow PowerPoint from hell, and we actually talk about what I've done and what I've built. So I can't go too far into this. I don't think I have an NDA or anything like that, but some of this is some of the internal tools that we are working on at Hearst. And what I can do is I can just show you what these things are. So this drop down, these date select boxes, that button, this table, and most of the things in this header are all individual Vue components. They're all individual Lego pieces that we used to build this page. What I did is I created a central library, which I will show you in a second. We push that up to NPM. We have a private NPM repo that we're using. The developers do npm install Hearst Auto Vue components. They then get all of these tools. They then include this component just like you would any other HTML element or any other component. If you've done this with React, if you've done anything with Vue or Angular 2, and you've created sort of these custom components, that's all these are. And this button is going to look the same everywhere. This is going to behave the same everywhere. This is going to be the same behavior. You can make some small changes, right? You can make some global overrides. Most of the components that we've created don't have, they don't have a lot of specific color information because we will be using some of this stuff across different products, and so the brand colors might change. We're taking advantage of Post CSS, which if you haven't used that, it's really cool. It's a post processor, so it's like Sass, but a little different. It allows you to just write regular CSS for the most part, and it has a plugin called CSS Next, which is like Babel for CSS. So you can use next generation CSS, run it through this Post CSS Next processor, and all you're doing is you're just writing CSS code. You don't have to worry about auto prefixing. You don't have to worry about whether or not browsers support it because it'll polyfill all of that stuff for you. This is the actual little mini Vue app that is the shared module guide. So this is here because it's to help the developers figure out how they want to use something. So for instance, the one I keep going off about is buttons. So buttons have some different options for styling. This is the code. This is the element that is created. Can you guys see that in the back of the room? I can blow this up. I think I can blow this up. This is the parts of technology where I'm not good. How's that? Better? Okay. So literally all you're doing is in your Vue, there's a Vue file, and I'll show it to you, that creates the buttons. It's a single file component, and it creates this element, and you can pass these properties to it and tell it exactly what to do. So some of them are class-based properties. Some of them tell you what to do, whether it's got to submit, right? So whatever your submit functions are going to be. The buttons are fairly simple because, again, this isn't a major application at this point. It's just kind of a, type in your email address and hit submit. We don't have a whole lot of crazy things going on. Some of the places we do. This internal application, which is, again, why I can't go too far into it because it belongs to Car and Driver. That's something that will actually be used by the people that do the reviews of the cars, and the amount of detail that they take on each car that they review is bananas. I consider myself a car person, and they take notes on stuff that I didn't even know was a thing on a car. And I rebuilt a classic. And so I thought, I was like, I understand cars. Nah, they do all kinds of crazy notes. So we had to come up with a lot of really interesting use cases for a lot of that stuff. So what does the button code look like? So in my actual code, this is the button module over here. There's a way to make this larger, I think. What is the view, the zoom in WebStorm? Does anybody know off the top of their head?
I think it's just Command and plus. Try that.
Nope. Nope. Oh, there you go. I can just look at that, 2-finger zoom. It worked. Amazing. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So this is a demo of what the button module looks like. Very simple HTML. We define our props up here. So the v-on is a property that's provided by Vue, right? So that's something that's there, so we can tell that what to do. Just doing a standard export, giving it a name, telling it what our properties are, what to do with the data. We put some default data in there, so if you don't have a name, it'll go ahead and have that. These slots are actually provided by Vue as well. They're just overwritable chunks that you could use. Works perfectly for something like this. Would not be what you'd want to use for something that's a little more advanced. It's got a little more interactivity to it. But if you just need to do a quick swap out of some text, slots are perfect for that kind of thing. And then all the scoped styles. So this, I can come in here and just style the HTML for a button. I don't have a button class. I have some additional classes at the bottom, right? You saw up there I had some rules that if we told it was a secondary button, right? So I do have some additional classes that can be added, but it's just one class. And I can do that for utility class as well. They can just be thrown on there and can be passed as a property of class, right? So it's just one of the properties that we can add to it. But again, when this gets rendered, and this is where the magic is, if you look here, that scoped button, I don't know that there's a way to zoom in on DevTools. So, oh, is Command Plus to do that? I've been using a Mac for a year. You think I know what the hell I'm doing? All right, so that scoped attribute, what it does is it adds this data value here. So when it renders that unique data value, and you can see over here in my styles, I'm getting my exercise running back and forth between these two like a moron. You can see here, this has created a brand new unique button. And it's assigned that data attribute to it automatically when it renders so that the styles only apply there. There's not gonna be another one of these buttons on the page unless I incorporate, like say, hey, just drop a regular button on there. And even that button is probably still gonna have another unique ID, so if I needed to target it for something, I could. Now you can also do modules. That's one of the other things you can do when you're setting up your CSS components, or your single file components rather. You can say, instead of scope, you can say module, and it'll create a standalone CSS module. Applying some of the classes and the other stuff, like if you need to change classes, when we tested that out with modules, didn't work so well. Scoped was the one that kind of worked in all use cases, so that's why we went with that. Module is something I want to kind of keep hammering around on to try to figure out why it doesn't work. The module, instead of actually applying a data attribute to it, will actually assign a class name to it and actually create a different class. So it'll be button class equals with this unique generated class name. But again, adding additional class names onto that got a little funky, whereas using the scoped one via the data element allowed that to be really simple. So the number one benefit that we got from this, and the project that I'm actively still working on, and you can see we kind of did every sort of variation, star ratings, checkboxes. A lot of these are form elements, different types of inputs. How many times, not to pick on designers, but I'm kind of going to pick on designers. How many people have worked on, like you've had to work on something like this, which is really just a checkbox behind the scenes. But they're like, but I want that because it's way cooler looking. Or this, you know, a number incrementer, which is, I don't even remember what this is behind the scenes. I think it's just an input. Oh yeah, not even that. I can't even remember. I mean, it becomes an input. It gets treated as an input, but it's an enhancement on top of a standard input, right? Because, and being honest, some standard inputs, they're just ugly, right? So everybody wants to enhance them. So we enhance them. So we come up with the dropdown is another one that, you know, regular dropdowns are ugly on just about every platform. So everybody wants to change them up a little bit. But you do this once, and then trying to get that applied in multiple places, man, it becomes a headache. And trying to get the right class and worrying about the cascade and everything. You do this, it creates that element. You copy this code, on every page where you need that select element, it looks exactly like that. Every page that you go through here that has one of these select boxes, when they're active, they're disabled on certain sections. When they're active, they behave and look exactly the same. Nothing that gets inherited on any of these other internal pages impacts what that looks like. That button is exactly the same. We now have, Hearst now has, and what the project I'm working on is finishing out the remaining components that they don't have, is basically a giant virtual box of Legos that the designers can pull from. The designers know exactly what they're working on. We actually have a Frontify. Are you familiar with Frontify? Has anybody seen that? Frontify is kind of like a hosted version of Pattern Lab. So if you're doing, I think they've got a demo up here somewhere. It's like a hosted style guide. I'm not going to go all the way through that. That's a mess. But what you can see, hell, I'll just go to Pattern Lab. Pattern Lab has an actual demo that I can show you. So this is the Pattern Lab tool that I was talking about. So these are all atoms, right? These are all the smallest parts of the code base that you'd be working on. And then those atoms combine into molecules, right? So that's an image atom plus a header atom plus a text atom combined, right? Forms a molecule. So Hearst has a Frontify for the designers that has things like all of the colors and what all of this stuff should look like, right? All of these colors, what text styles you should use, how buttons should look, that they can go say, okay, cool, I know all of that stuff. I have all of the brand guidelines here. When I do a design, I know that it's going to conform to what the car and driver standards are. So I can do that there. They can then work directly with the developers and say, we need a button here, we need this. They can hand a grayscale sketch on the back of a napkin, and the developer can go and take these view components, drop them into a page, and it's going to look exactly how the designer was envisioning it while they were mapping it out, even if they haven't bothered to put any of the colors or anything like that in it. It makes the turnaround time much faster. It makes things more cohesive all the way around. It removes problems like you get 3/4 of the way down the page and the cascade caused something unexpected. It allows you to lock in your JavaScript behavior. You know, if this thing needs to process things in a certain way, you can test that on the component level. You can get in there and make sure that this form input, if it's got to validate a certain way, validates before you build the entire app. And then you go, well, shit, what the hell is wrong on line 50 of this thing once I put it together? And we've all kind of been there. So that's the biggest strength, right? The uptime, the ease of use. It brings us as close to the holy grail of web components that we can possibly get right now without actually getting web components just yet. So that's my experience with doing modularization and styling using the Vue single file components. Any questions?
Oh,
check that out.
yeah.
That's a giant microphone.
You can toss it too, yeah.
Can you?
Mm-hmm.
That's rad.
So I feel like React does a lot of like separating things into components a lot, like
Yes.
how you've explained. What do you like more about Vue over using React?
What I like about the Vue single file components and it was this one tiny, tiny little thing, because what React did was really exciting, right? When React first launched, I was like, oh, this is awesome, right? This is getting us close to this holy grail. What React did, or what Vue did that I loved is this. I could just write CSS. I got my start doing pure HTML and CSS. Doing CSS and JS is probably the way everything is going. There are more libraries coming out to make that more easier to do. There is part of me that feels like JavaScript engineers have it in their head that they just have to make shit really difficult just because. I feel like they have imposter syndrome because of the people that do like Java and backend development that have been doing it for years and all have beards 5 times as long as mine and 8 times more gray. so they have this thing where like, oh, everything needs to be harder. So they make CSS harder. And the ability to just sit down and view using Webpack has a lot of extensibility. So I included post CSS in Webpack. And so this just runs through post CSS. I could just as easily say style Sass, and this would run Sass. And I just include a few of those things. So it was the ability to just write in the languages that I already knew that really put it over the top for me. I was like, this is great. I could do it in React. It wouldn't be that hard, but I have to learn all the JSX. I have to learn all these new syntaxes. Vue meant I could write HTML, I could write CSS, I could write JavaScript. I'm done.
Cool, thanks.
It all runs through Webpack, right? So you run the Vue processor. So with the way we're using it runs through Webpack. You don't have to run Webpack, right? Let's at the Creative Circus, like I said, they're doing it where they're just dropping the Vue library in the bottom, just like we did with jQuery, and then you just use the Vue commands and they're ready to go. So it depends on what you're building and how you want to do it, as to whether or not you would actually need a true like compiler.
Microphone. Does Hertz do any sort of visual regression testing? So like one of the cool parts of having a component library like that is that when you change, button primary, it's updated everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Do they do any sort of testing to make sure that when they change components, that it doesn't break something, like doesn't have those unintended consequences somewhere else?
Do they? No. Do they want to? Yes. Right now, we're still in the process of getting a lot of this up to speed. So they're doing, kind of the standard test-driven development stuff, and then test, unit test, that kind of stuff. We haven't really, the design team is actually really, really small. And the developer that is doing the, that is creating these components and doing the design work with that is me. And I work for them 10 hours a week. So we haven't gotten there yet. That is a goal though, right? That's somewhere that we want to get, because they also want to start rolling in more A/B testing to see how certain things convert, and the ability to do visual regression testing and all those things kind of go hand in hand, right? If you're making a small layout change to one page, you want to make sure that things look the same, and that when you do make that change, that it applies across the board. So not there yet, but it is, it's a place that they want to get to.
Kind of a related question about if you have like a pattern library of various bits and pieces you're going to put together,
Mm-hmm.
and then somebody finds a special case where they want the button to be a little shorter or respond in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you then add a new button to the library? Do you have some type of version control, or how do you, what becomes of special cases like that?
I'm not really sure. Yeah, you could. I mean, so there's nothing that precludes you from dropping in just a regular button that you style yourself, right? If you had one button that needed to look or behave differently than what's in the pattern library, just drop in HTML, throw in some new stuff, and you're good to go. So there's nothing that's precluding you from doing that, because again, at the end of the day, it's all just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We haven't run into that because again, everything is really prescriptive at Hearst. Like everything looks like this, everything behaves like this. So once they get into sort of the application part, right? Once we move beyond the magazine car review section, they might run into a few edge cases where they need things to act a little bit differently. But right now, so far, everything that we've tested and everything that we've built has been able to kind of work within the confines that we're in. So we haven't really run into that edge case yet.
It is an interesting problem though. So one of the things that we do at Salesloft is, the whole point of Atomic CSS or Atomic Design rather, is to have like the toolbox, and instead of designing a new button, you go to your buttons that you already have, and you're like, well, I need this one, But so when we get new designs that have new buttons on them, we actually just go back to the designer and we say, why did you do this? Like, what do you need this new button for?
We have buttons.
And half the time they say, oh, just do it like the same way we always do it. And then the other half the time they say, oh, well, this is important. We need this. So like when it's important enough to make a new thing, just go make a new component for it,
Well, I was thinking of when people are afraid to delete CSS because somewhere something might be using it. And so you decide you're going to update a button, but
Right.
that's where someone was depending on something that you don't care about anymore, you don't,
Right.
things like that.
Well, the nice thing with this is that you don't run into that CSS problem, right? Because it's no longer there in the global. Like the global CSS is really tiny. Like the global CSS that we're passing is, so our internal tools have one color scheme. Our car and driver side has another color scheme. So the only thing we pass into the global are what we're using CSS variables, not even Sass variables, and we're just passing what those color schemes are. And that's it. So there's nothing that's sort of like floating around out there in CSS land that we're going, the hell is this rule form? Why has it got important on the end, right? You know, have to be like, if I delete this, is the whole thing going to come crumbling down? So we don't have to worry about that as much. I will say that when we were building these internal tools, this was the first time that I had done anything with Vue. It was the first time any of us had. And so there were plenty of times where that people would come back, and I wasn't the only one writing this stuff. I was working with a few other developers. I built kind of the core skeletal structure and said, here's how these things should be built. And then through code review and all the other stuff, made sure that everything else that was coming in was working. But we would have, use cases where it's like, hey, you built this, but you were a little too siloed, focused on that, that one atom by itself. And as soon as we paired it with this other thing, those margins sent everything all crazy. So we could make that change, right? And because we're doing it with NPM, I would just, version it, push it up, tell everybody to go grab the newest copy of the NPM repo. They pull it down and all their stuff is up to date.
I know you mentioned you can do this on the server side or client side.
Mm-hmm.
What about performance? What have you seen from a performance perspective overall?
So this was the big sell because we had to sell this to the CTO, right? Because when the CTO was there before we all were, and we're all coming in going, hey, those consultants you hired? We have a better solution. We had to make sure that we had the metrics to make sure that was in fact the better solution. Doing Nuxt, which is the server side, generates the server side generation, effectively a static site generator for Vue. Doing that, the pages that it created, we were able to get our load times for our review pages, which are pretty packed with content, right? A car and driver review page is pretty thick. There's a ton of data. Again, all that data they collect, that all goes into that review. The Angular ones were loading in, some of them were taking as long as 6 seconds. And the Nuxt generated pages, we were loading in sub 1 second. I think we had some of them were doing like the longest was like 800 milliseconds. That's off the top of my head. So David would know those numbers better than me because he's working with that every day. But that's what made the sell easy, because we said, hey, you know how our site is performing like this? If we move to this is what it does. And they tackled the hardest pages first. So so from the performance aspect, we've just found that it performs. It's super, super lightweight, and doing the server side rendering, it was, it's Angular has a thing called Angular Universal, which kind of does some server side rendering for bots to crawl and all that stuff. I don't think it's ready for prime time yet. I think it's close. It still needs to be hammered on. This static site generating tool that Vue already had, and React has similar tools, just beat everything else out of the water. Client-side generation, everything I've seen from Vue has been really, really quick. It's a lightweight library. It's really, really fast. Angular is a fantastic, if you're building Gmail, use Angular. If you're building just any other, web app that doesn't have kind of the overhead of like, it's making 1,000,001 AJAX queries, right? It's just like one XHR after the next and tons of different, like if you're not writing Google Sheets, use Vue. It's super, super lightweight, and it's super powerful, right? Like I said, it's powering Alibaba, which is a massive e-commerce site. So it runs really, really quickly.
Okay, so I noticed that in that custom button component you just showed, you wrap the raw HTML button tag inside and pass the onClick function from the parent component to that raw button tag. And I remember that in Vue's documentation, they mentioned the pattern called props down, event up. So they recommend a way to emit a event from the child component and then catch that child component in the parent component and trigger the onClick event. I wonder if you have tried that. Why did you choose to do the onClick, to pass the onClick function in this way? Is there any performance issue, or is this just your?
It's I didn't know any better.
Oh, yeah.
It's the button was the first one that I built, and we kind of
Yeah, React.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, yeah, it was, there's probably 1,000,001 things that if we go through these components, as we get more comfortable with Vue, then we'll go, ooh, why did we, it's a sign of a good developer, right? If you look at the code you wrote yesterday and don't hate it, then you should probably stop developing because you've stopped working. Yeah, it's, I honestly don't know. It's probably something that I just overlooked when I was building it. So I go back to that first slide where I'm like, not a Vue.js expert. And then some of these, and I'll be perfectly honest, like as we get into some of these, I think like this one, I couldn't even tell you what most of the stuff is because I wrote the skeleton and then handed it over to other people, and all of the logic was written by somebody else. I did the style and the HTML and the base logic, right? So the exporting of the defaults, but anything beyond that, I didn't even work on. So yeah, so there's probably tons of room for improvement throughout this stuff. Cool. Well, thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.